I, Mark Carney, do solemnly and sincerely promise and swear that I will truly and faithfully, and to the best of my skill and knowledge, execute the powers and trust reposed in me as Prime Minister.
As a European,
Honorary
I am a European,
European.
actually.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
oh.
Irish citizen. Yeah, so
Well,
there you
welcome,
go.
welcome.
Speaking as a European,
The future is shaped by us, and particularly shaped by us here in this room.
We will no longer surrender this country or its people to the false song of globalism. We must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse.
People will charge me as being elitist or a globalist, to use that term, which is, well, that's exactly, it happens to be exactly what we need.
They predicted an overpopulation crisis in the 1960s, mass starvation in the 70s, and an end of oil in the 1990s.
So yesterday I was at a reception for Prime Minister Trudeau, and I know that half of this cabinet, or even more half of this cabinet, are actually young global leaders of the world. That we penetrate the cabinets.
Here at Davos with a lot of my friends.
I know this is called the World Government Summit, but I think we should be maybe a little bit concerned about actually becoming too much of a single world government.
These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives.
You're going to take three-pronged strategy to do this. There's a role for the public sector, there's a role for the private sector, and there's a role for the faith sector.
The whole idea that humans have, they have this soul or spirit, and they have...
We will never let radical socialists destroy our economy, wreck our country.
Free will, that's over.
America will always be the proud, strong, and unyielding bastion of freedom.
So it's a clash between two systems.
But human rights are just like heaven and like God. It's just a fictional story that we've invented and spread around.
You need to understand that the future of the world is not secularism. It is religious pluralism.
To our discussion, which we had at dinner 2 days ago, the fourth industrial revolution has one big challenge. It is the holding out of the middle class.
In America, we understand what the pessimists refuse to see: that a growing and vibrant market economy focused on the future lifts the human spirit.
Who will really command the fourth industrial revolution?
I'm here to build the strongest economy for all Canadians. The old rules-based order is finished.
Carbon tax Carney has become conflict Carney, when in fact he essentially is advising the Prime Minister.
You said this week that you're an outsider, but you've been offering the Liberals support advice for years. How can you explain how you're any different?
Oh, well, there's a pretty big difference between being a member of the cabinet, a member of the caucus, the Prime Minister himself.
I actually have known Mark for a very long time.
And being someone who occasionally their advice is asked. Look,
I speak with him often. He's actually my son's godfather.
I do spend some time advising on what, again, pro bono, but advising on the types of policies that are going to have maximum impacts.
This is very convenient for the Prime Minister to appoint Mr. Carney chair of the Liberal Party's task force.
I understand that your assets have been put into a blind trust. I wanted to ask you, what is the value of the assets and where did they come from? How can Canadians know that there's no conflict of interest if they don't know where the assets come from?
That's an odd question. The assets are in a blind trust. I have 6 months to put, or 120 days to put the assets in a blind trust. I already have put the assets in a blind trust. And once assets are in a blind trust, you don't know that. By definition, you don't know the assets because the trustees take over the responsibility.
We understand that you have now placed your assets in a blind trust, so you don't know what's happening to them going forward, but you knew what they were going into that blind trust. So what are they?
I know the leader of the opposition's into full disclosure, so I'm going to full disclosure. Full disclosure.
simple. I am no longer a senior executive at Brookfield. I am no longer a senior executive at Bloomberg. I am no longer on the board of Stripe. I am no longer on the board of PIMCO. I am no longer on the board of any of my commercial activities. I am no longer the UN Special Envoy for Climate Action and Finance.
Look, Stephanie, I follow the rules of the Ethics Commissioner.
Speaking as a European.
The rules say that those assets should be publicly disclosed within 120 days, which means you'll campaign and are serving as Prime Minister now, with Canadians not being aware of what potential conflicts of interest you sought to
possible
avoid.
conflict would you have?
He has millions of dollars of financial interests that run against Canada's national interests.
Conflicts. Now, what are some of those conflicts?
Just like when he supported carbon taxes in Canada while investing in American coal.
Stephanie, I'm complying with the rules. I'm complying with the rules in advance. Point final.
Full disclosure.
We find out that the government raises the threshold for insured mortgages from $1 million to $1.5 million.
There's no possible conflict of interest in your assets. It's very difficult to believe.
You're a senior executive at Brookfield, and yet your compensation has not been disclosed. Can you tell us what your compensation over the past 3 years has been and how you will manage potential conflicts of interest as you enter politics?
You make billions of dollars off foreign pipelines and you shut them down here at home, putting our people out of work.
Look inside yourself, Rosemary. I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will.
But those who are lagging behind and are still part of the problem will be punished.
I have served in the private sector. I have stood up for Canada. I have left my roles in the private sector at a time of crisis for our country.
Speaking as a European.
It just so happens that carbon tax Carney, also known as conflict of interest Carney, is the chair of none other than Brookfield, that owns Sagen, the second largest mortgage insurer.
Full disclosure.
Upon his appointment, the government, just out of coincidence, raises the threshold for insured mortgages, the owner of the second largest mortgage insurer.
Your line of questioning is trying to invent new rules.
It resulted in Brookfield benefiting richly from that decision. In fact, their stock hit a 6-month high.
You're the vice chairman at Brookfield Asset Management prior to
The chair.
I was the chair. Sorry. In the fall, they moved their head office from Toronto to New York. Did you approve of that decision, and what does this say about your commitment to growing Canada's economy and betting on Canada?
I ceased to be chair on the 15th, I think, of January. The formal decision of the board, happened after I ceased to be on the board.
He gets rich, making Canadians poor. And we know Carney will sell out Canada for his personal profit. He's already done it. He's systematically done it his entire time as a corporate insider.
With Canada, the most European of non-European countries. Speaking as a European.
That we penetrate the cabinets.
Helping to fix the global system. So I'll give you an example. 2% of global emissions is for air travel.
Do you support the Prime Minister's decision to veto the Northern Gateway pipeline, Mr. Carney?
So the question is, are we going to have green, sustainable aviation fuel?
Do you support it?
I think it's sensible. I wasn't involved in the decision, but I think it's the right decision.
Look, if you're flying in and out of Heathrow or wherever, you have to have 10% of your load has to be sustainable aviation fuel by, I think it's 23.
And yet your company has invested billions of dollars in oil companies in both Brazil and the UAE to buy pipelines.
Consequence of that policy has been to convert some entrepreneurs.
You bought billions of dollars of pipelines as a company.
In that case, Brookfield put $1 billion to work there.
Do you support those investments?
Full disclosure. Speaking as a European.
There is a global energy system, and one of the issues, I'm trying to explain a bit of how the economy works. One of the
Thank
issues,
you so much.
It may help. One of the issues for this committee in thinking about a sustainable transition.
Do you support it?
Where is Canada's role in those as energy transitions from fossil fuels to renewables, and in different jurisdictions?
The point being, without the policy, the policy has to drive it and drive things down.
Into different geography, it matters. It matters,
Okay.
and this is a fundamental point.
Yeah.
No, I'm
So-
sorry. This is a fundamental.
so I'm sorry. You've
finally
exceeded
getting
the
to
time.
a point
You've exceeded
that
the
is
time.
relevant to this committee's inquiry.
What you're saying
what
is you
is the
oppose
transition
pipelines in
pathway?
Canada, but you support them in the UAE and in Brazil. That's what
There
you've
are
actually
specific-
said.
There are specific.
That's your double
pipelines.
standard.
It is not a double standard.
It is a
not
double standard.
No, it's not.
You
It's
make
not.
billions of
Mr.
dollars off
Mr.
foreign
Poilievre,
pipelines,
I
and you
would
shut them
I
down
would
here at
remind
home,
you-
putting
I
our
would
people out of
remind
work.
you.
Look inside yourself.
Of interest you sought to
possible
avoid.
conflict would you have?
See, and that is to avoid Mr. Carney being subject to the Conflict of Interest Act.
You can be sure about one thing. Donald Trump's going to have a briefing on his desk of all of Mark Carney's American investments.
And I'm here to build the strongest economy for all Canadians.
And he is going to leverage all of Carney's profit motive against the interests of the Canadian people.
And speaking as a European, it happens to be exactly what we need.
That we penetrate the cabinets.
And we know Carney will sell out Canada for his personal profit. He's already done it. He's systematically done it his entire time as a corporate insider. No staff, no ministers, no MPs in my caucus will be involved whatsoever in that organization. It is a group of high-flying, high-tax, high-carbon hypocrites who all got on their private jets to fly off to a remote ski village where they talked about how working-class people should not be allowed to heat their homes or drive their pickup trucks. I'm not going to work for a group of globalist billionaires who serve their own interests at the expense of everyone else. A massive wealth transfer from the have-nots to the have-yachts.
Wanted to get your thoughts on Mark Carney and your relationship with him while you were Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and any advice you have to Canadians who think he might make a good Prime Minister.
Well, Mark Carney was Governor of the Bank of England, and under his tenure, too much money was printed, which did damage to the British economy and put our economy off track. He, at the last election, endorsed Rachel Reeves' economic policy. She's now become Chancellor. It's been a disaster for Britain. The country is heading for bankruptcy. So I would strongly recommend not backing Mark Carney or his policies on net zero, which would be disastrous for Britain and would be disastrous for Canada.
He printed too much money. You think we have a problem with inflation now? This guy was responsible for the record inflation that was the highest in the G7 during his tenure at the Bank of England. At one point, Mark Carney had injected 59% new cash into the economy. Now that leads to what we call inflation. Sounds kind of like someone we know, Justin Trudeau.
And the budget will balance itself.
Did you ever see the graphs that show how everything went up as soon as Justin Trudeau was elected? Well, for the UK, you might as well insert Mark Carney's name where Justin Trudeau's was, and you would have the exact same result.
We penetrate the cabinets.
And I'm here to build the strongest economy for all Canadians. And speaking as a European.
You look at the graph of how things started and how things ended when he started advising the Liberals. Things went to hell in a handbasket economically. Way higher taxes, super high inflation, and cost of living went way up. 150% rise in the percentage of people living under the international poverty line.
The holding out of the middle class.
We can't redistribute what we don't have.
Helping to fix the global system.
That we penetrate the cabinets.
Do you believe that this could potentially be China's time once again?
On the one hand, we have state capitalism. On the other hand, we have shareholder or private capitalism. So it's a clash between two systems.
We must reject the perennial prophets of doom and their predictions of the apocalypse.
Look, the world is being fundamentally transformed. The old rules-based order is finished, but a new one, a new system has not yet emerged.
But I believe that the future is not state capitalism or shareholder capitalism. The future is what I call stakeholder capitalism, which is combined with the social responsibility.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
We need to get on track towards a net zero, climate safe and nature positive future, but we know this will not be easy.
Well, President Trump and some Americans may be turning back the clock on climate action. As Sean Fraser just indicated, we're picking up the pace.
Absolutely full credit, and I do in the book, to Greta Thunberg. To reach net zero, every country, every company, every bank, every investor, every pension fund around the world will need to make some big changes.
And we're going to need to change behaviors.
I would say I see myself as part of the social movement. In order to accomplish what we need is that there will be, for a period of time, a rising price of carbon. So far, carbon prices have been applied sparingly. They've been set far too low.
We're going to need to do this through a mixture of carrots and hopefully perhaps not so many sticks.
So it's a clash between two systems.
It's one of the reasons we're having this ruthless, relentless focus on net zero, because in the end, look, we can't stabilize the climate unless we get to net zero.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
Too many are falling behind. Too many young people can't afford a home.
There's going to be people of means who are going to travel. And then there's going to be people maybe who of lesser means who might actually be able to use an Oculus or a Magic Leap or some other kind of device to travel to the same place, but from their own couch.
We can't redistribute what we don't have. We are in an economic crisis that's brought on by the tariffs that have been put on Canada.
The economic crisis was brought on by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and you were his advisor.
I think you would find.
These people did not create that problem.
The policy has to drive it and drive things down.
The holding out of the middle class.
Because we've moved to the relentless logic of having to get emissions down consistent with the carbon budget.
Hey, nobody in Canada created that problem. Nobody in Canada created that problem.
I'd like to say, first of all, there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada.
Helping to fix the global system.
So that we penetrate the cabinet.
I'll take that as a no then.
No, you'll take that as a very comprehensive answer to your question.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
And that means, it means multiple levels of government, as you can appreciate.
We have to create the rules for globalization. Globalization needs rules. Digital technologies mainly have an analytical power. Now we go into a predictive power. But then the next step could be to go into a prescriptive mode. You do not even have to have elections anymore because you can already predict, and afterwards you can say, why do we need elections?
Free will, that's over.
And it means being coordinated with industry. It means coordinated with other stakeholders.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
So the companies and those who invest in them and lend to them, who are part of the solution, will be rewarded. But those who are lagging behind and are still part of the problem will be punished. Will be punished. Will be punished.
We're likely to see an increasing move towards more stick-like interventions.
I mean, you start from a prior of conflict and ill will. The world will know which financial institutions are part of the solution and which are outside the GFAN tent and remain the problem.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
Will be punished.
Ill will.
And speaking as a European.
New jobs will be created, but old jobs will be lost. And the question is, what happens to the people in those jobs?
The economic crisis was brought on by former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and you were his advisor.
I think you would find.
These people did not create that problem.
The policy has to drive it and drive things down.
Benefits of digital money. There are huge potential gains. It's not just about digital forms of physical currency. You can have programmability. Units of central bank currency with expiry dates.
China's central bank could put an expiration date on the digital money, similar to how lottery winnings have to be spent before a certain date.
It means that the Chinese government could set up a whole lot of things to have your currency maybe valid or invalid.
And tonight I'm also making another promise to protect Americans from government tyranny.
So is this about, like, lessening our relationship with the United States economically?
It's about enhancing our relationship with others.
We protect everybody. We do everything for all these countries, and a lot of these are globalist in nature.
Do you believe that this could potentially be China's time once again?
The old rules-based order is finished.
Does it set the right tone to be saying to the Chinese, come in, do business here, set up banks?
It's a clash between two systems.
These alarmists always demand the same thing: absolute power to dominate, transform, and control every aspect of our lives.
Use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers, build this economy, and take on the Americans.
And post-national globalism has not only divided and weakened our country's sense of identity, it has endangered our people. When I'm Prime Minister, that radical, borderless, globalist ideology pushed by the Trudeau-Carney liberals will end.
As your president, I will never allow the creation of a central bank digital currency. You know about that?
You could have, as I argue in my book, a potentially better and some people might see it as a darker world where the government decides that units of central bank money can be used to purchase some things, but not other things that it deems less desirable.
Free will, that's over.
What happens is that you go through a long period with huge change of jobs and industries, and that workers are slow to benefit from the benefits of those new industries.
We are in an economic crisis.
We're going to have to force change.
It's brought on by the tariffs that have been put on Canada. The policy has to drive it and drive things down.
And what happens is that eventually people get retrained. Eventually new social safety net and welfare systems are put in place to support people.
We can't redistribute what we don't have.
But it happens decades after the fact. The political process lags.
So it's a clash between two systems.
It happens to be exactly what we need.
Through technology and ability for consumers to measure their own carbon footprint. What does that mean?
Apparently, I was told by a central banker, is, CBDCs looks like a small grain of rice that they want to put under your skin. Why suddenly are the billionaires saying, let's have universal basic income? Because the story is going to be, now we've created this vast unemployment and disruption and crises. Well, we need universal basic income. But of course, to run this efficiently, we need to use the latest technology. So, you need the CBDC chip implant.
That's, where are they traveling? How are they traveling? What are they eating? What are they consuming on the platform? So, individual carbon footprint tracker. Stay tuned. We don't have it operational yet, but this is something that we're working on.
It will.
Will be punished.
We're likely to see an increasing move towards a more stick-like interventions.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
Will be punished.
Free will, that's over.
It will.
So if we penetrate the cabinets.
People will charge me as being elitist or a globalist, to use that term, which is, that's exactly, it happens to be exactly what we need.
And speaking as a European.
How do you justify how does the UN climate envoy justify the massive carbon footprint here today? To set this up, this fake city for a week event. How did you get here? Did you fly? You walked?
Yeah.
Did you come on a private jet?
Of course not.
No, so how do you justify this? Look at all of this. For 1 week event, the carbon footprint is huge. Don't you think that's a bit hypocritical?
Drop it.
So far, carbon prices have been applied sparingly. They've been set far too low.
We'll immediately eliminate the divisive consumer carbon tax on families and farmers and small and medium-sized businesses. It's about getting, pipelines built across this country so that we can displace imports of foreign oil.
You don't suddenly change your values on the eve of an election. You don't define yourself as a human being for years and years of your life fighting for a policy that you claim is the most important for our lifetime and then suddenly change.
We will be eliminating the Canada fuel charge, the consumer fuel charge, immediately.
How dare you!
Enjoy your 10 hours in the car!
power and let the planet burn.
The negative impacts of the carbon tax on households without fully recognizing the positive impacts of the rebate has made this more of a divisive issue.
These are just outright lies.
We've already shown several times Mark Carney speaking publicly about how all he's going to do is hide the carbon tax, change its name, call it a shadow carbon tax.
We need to use effectively a shadow carbon price.
What they're going to do is they're going to run this scam right up until the election. And then when they don't need your vote anymore, but they still need your money, they're going to go right back to hiking the carbon tax. They thought they were going to get away with it. Carney thought he had the perfect con, but he wasn't counting on one important thing: you. Millions of Canadians realizing that no matter what Liberals call it, no matter how they try to hide it, you will always pay it.
Not that we as taxpayers pay, but the large polluters pay. And so what happens...
But does that not ultimately trickle down?
No, because what the big companies are producing, by and large, are not products that we are consuming.
A rising price of carbon.
Are you going to ensure that those big polluters don't pass on the cost to hardworking Canadians, as you say?
Well, you've got to look at what the big polluters are producing versus where that's consumed. So I'm Dofasco, I'm a steel company. I'm not passing on my costs down through to the level of the consumption product.
Speaking as a European.
In the past, you've supported the carbon tax and defended Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's stance on the carbon tax. Why now? Why are you coming up with this now?
This ruthless, relentless focus on net zero.
Whether it's Justin Trudeau's carbon tax or Mark Carney's shadow carbon tax, Liberals will keep raising it and you will continue to pay more.
Because you'd be Prime Minister in a matter of weeks, why wouldn't you tell the Canadian people what they're in for?
Canadians are going to know exactly what we intend to do.
Use all of the powers of the federal government, including the emergency powers.
You do not even have to have elections anymore.
Well, a lot of them are globalist countries and companies that won't be doing as well because we're taking back things that have been taken from us.
Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon. I never do.
I understand. My one question is, can the Canadian oil and gas sector survive the net zero approach that's being promoted here?
As I said, I never do. If you want to interview with me, like everybody else, you make a request to me.
Okay, you are trespassing, so leave the property.
Okay. All right.
I'll take that as a no then.
No, you'll take that as a very comprehensive answer to your question.
And so here we are in Canada, and Mark Carney's come along to save the Canada, but really to save the planet. And Canadians are daft enough to start. You can see the scales tilting in his favor. I mean, we were going to decimate the Liberals because Trudeau's been such an absolute bloody nightmare catastrophe in his narcissistic and incompetent manner. And now Carney's coming waltzing in from the Bank of England with his ESG and his DEI and his net zero and his you don't need fossil fuels, peasants or cars. And Canadians are lining up to vote for him.
So it's a clash between two systems.
We can't redistribute what we don't have. People will charge me as being elitist or globalist, to use that term, which is, that's exactly, it happens to be exactly what we need.
Speaking as a European.
So that we penetrate the cabinets.
Religious pluralism.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
It's a holding out of the middle class.
Increasing move towards a more stick-like intervention.
Ill will.
Will be punished.
Free will, that's over.
I'd like to say, first of all, there's no such thing as parental rights in Canada.
A Canadian life is worth between 3.3 and 9.9 million Canadian dollars.
Are you concerned that Trump might be elected again?
Sure. I think it's very likely. And if it happens, it is likely to be the kind of like the death blow to what remains of the global order.
Someone very profoundly once said many years ago that if fascism ever comes to America, it'll come in the name of liberalism. And what is fascism? Fascism is private ownership, private enterprise, but total government control and regulation. Well, isn't this the liberal philosophy? The conservative, so-called, is the one that says less government, get off my back, get out of my pocket, and let me have more control of my own destiny.